Shir tonight is called Megillat Yehudit and eating dairy on Chanuka. Okay, also a little bit off the beaten path, but as I said, we want to try and find some sort of interesting facets of Chanuka that we may not have explored before. Let's take a look at the Shulchan Aruch first in source number 1. Riboy ha-su'udot shemarbim bahem heim su'udot harishut. So the first thing the Shulchan Aruch says, we know that there's no mitzvah of Suda on Chanukah. So if you make a nice Chanukah masiba with the Suda, it's a Sudas Rishus, and this has halachic applications. Shelo kavim lemishta v'simcha. This would they never established Chanukah as days of rejoicing and having festive meals. So, and you know that the famous explanation as to the difference between Chanukah and Purim is that Purim was a time when our lives were in danger, and therefore we celebrated with more physical indulgence. Chanukah was more of an intellectual threat, an ideological threat to the Jewish people, and therefore we celebrated in a more esoteric, non-physical fashion. Okay, the Ramah says, "V'yesh omrim sheyesh ktsas mitzvah beriboy hasuudos." Mishum deba'osan hayomim haya chanukah samizbeach. Some say that there should be a slight increase in one's suuda, merrymaking, because these were the days of the chanukah samizbeach, of the inauguration of the mizbeach, both in the times of the Chashmonaim, and as we know, that the Mishkan was completed during this time as well. V'noagin lomar zemiros ushvachos b'sudo shemar bin bahem v'oz habisudas mitzvah. If you sing songs and praises to Hashem during these masibas, so then it becomes a sudas mitzvah because you're incorporating words of prayer and Torah. And then finally the Ramah says, Yesh omrim sheyesh lechol gevina b'chanukah lefi shahanes nasa b'cholav shehechila Yehudis esol oyev. Some say that there's a custom to eat Chanukah, to eat cheese on Chanukah, because the miracle was done through milk that Yehudis fed to the enemy. Now, who is this enemy? Who is this Yehudis? New aspect to the story that you won't find in the book of Maccabees, neither 1, 2, 3, or 4, and nor will you find it in the scroll of Antiochus. So what is this story? So the Mishnah Berurah tells us, Shehechila Yehudis hi haisa bito shel Kohen Gadol v'haisa gezera. She was the daughter of the Kohen Gadol, of Yochanan Kohen Gadol. So that gets Matisyahu's sister, right? And v'haisa gezera shekol arusa tiboy l'tafsar techila. And there was a decree. What do you call this decree in Latin? This decree is called Jus Prome Noctus, and it's an old medieval legend that there were many different rulers or tyrants that were accused of saying, and the Gemara records this as well, so it goes back to the ancient world, that there was a decree that if you lived under a very, very powerful tyrant, he had first night's rights with any Basula who was getting married. She would have to go to the Hegmon, she would have to go to the ruler first and spend time with him to become deflowered, and that was the Gezerah that was placed upon the Jewish people as well. And V'hechila l'rosh hatzorim gevina l'shichruso, and she gave the head of the oppressors, she gave him cheese in order to make him shikr, presumably because cheese makes you thirsty, and then you drink wine. V'chasches rosho ubarchu kulam. And she therefore cut off his head, she decapitated him, and they were all able to flee. Now, this story has very nebulous origin, and what we want to discover tonight is what the origin of this story is. And once we discover the origin of the story, then we have to figure out why the minhag became to commemorate the story with the eating of cheese. After all, why not have wine? I mean, if that's... But of course, wine's not going to work because that's already taken by Purim. So we got to find something else. So the first thing we have to understand is, what is the origin of this story? This is not a story that's brought by the Gemara. It's not a story that's brought in the Medrash. As a matter of fact, the earliest time we find the story of Yehudis is in the Ran and the Kolbo. At least the earliest time you find the story of Yehudit related to Chanuka. Now let's be very careful in our definitions. When I say this is the earliest time you find a story about Yehudit, I mean to say it's the earliest time you find a story of Yehudit as it relates to the story of Chanuka. So let's first go through the Gemaras that tell us the source about this whole idea that there was a woman involved in the Chanuka story. Because at face value, we have sort of like two different narratives of Chanuka. One is the narrative that the Chashmonoim rose up against the Greeks, defeated the Greek army, re-sanctified the temple, light a menorah, it burns for 8 days miraculously, and let's have latkes. Okay? Where does the story of Yehudit come into that story? It's almost as it's not like, for example, the story of Esther and how Esther plays a central role in the Purim story. She's the main character. She and Mordechai, they're the main protagonists. They're the main heroes of the story. Yehudit is a byline. Yehudit is like, you have the headline, Hasmoneans win victory. And then like a little corner article is Judith decapitates general, right? It's not even an integral part of the story. So where does this all come into play? Why is this being introduced into the whole Hanukkah narrative in the first place? Something fishy is going on.
Sorry, you say the Ran is the first place? Because it's not really in the Gemara.
No, it's nowhere in the Gemara that the story of Yehudit.
The story, but it's alluded to.
Not even alluded to.
Hanukkah? The story?
Hanukkah is alluded to in the Gemara. Hanukkah is discussed in the
women had a role?
Yeah, there's no place in the Gemara that says that. We'll go through the Gemara. So comes along, let's take a look at the Gemara. The Gemara in Maseches Psachim tells us, V'amar Reb Yeshua ben Levi, Nashim chayavos be'arba kosos halalu, sha'af hein hayu ba'oso hanes. That women are obligated in the mitzvah of arba kosos because they were also part of the miracle of the Exodus. And we know that there's a famous machlokes as how we understand the words sha'af hein hayu ba'oso hanes. Famous machlokes between the Rashbam and Rashi on one side and Tosfos on the other side. But before we get to that machlokes, I want to show you the very first time that we see anyone understanding that Gemara as meaning that women were an integral part of the miraculous experience. And where he taught, and where this is, and the reason why I have this is from the Sefer Otzer HaGaonim, from Harav Levin, very, very famous set of svarim called Otzer HaGaonim, which brings out a number of tshuvas of Gaonim. So we know that this goes back to Rav Hai Gaon. Earlier than that, we don't have a source for this, that there's an understanding of the Gemara in the following way. You understand the Gaonim come before the Rishon. So when we want to try and find the original source of something, we look first at the Gemara. Then if we can't find anything in the Gemara, we go to the Gaonim next, and then we look at the Rishonim. So comes along Rav Hai Gaon on this Gemara, Kinamrinan Bischar Noshim Tzidkanios Shabaos, or Tzidkayos, there's nuns missing, Shabaoso Hador Nigalu, V'chein Gabi Mikra Megillah Namri Amrinan Hachi, De Mishum Dayidei Esther Nigalu, V'chein Gabi Ner Chanukah De Masech Shabbos, Lashon Rav Hai Zatzal. So Rav Hai Gaon says that when this Gemara tells us that there is a mitzvah, that women are commanded in the mitzvah of Arba Kosos, it means that not just, there are two ways of understanding the Gemara. One way of understanding the Gemara is that the women were saved and taken out of Egypt just like the men were. So therefore, any mitzvah that we have that commemorates the Exodus should be celebrated equally by men and by women. But there's another way of understanding it, is that there's something that makes women stand out, and this is the way Rav Hai understands it. He says women stand out by the story of Pesach. He doesn't really tell us, other than telling us the Maimer Chazal, that in the Zuchus of Nashim Tzidkanios, our ancestors were redeemed from Egypt. And we know the famous Gemara and Medrash that tells us that it was the women who had more emun and bitachon than the men, and they were the ones who encouraged their husbands to procreate and to never give up hope, and that was why we left with such a multitude of Jews when it was time to leave Mitzrayim. So therefore, because they played such a central role in the procreation of Klal Yisrael, so that we numbered 600,000 when we left, we therefore give a special mitzvah to women, even though it's a mitzvah saseh shazman grama. It's important to note that all three of these mitzvahs that are enumerated by Rav Hai and by the other and by the Rishonim as well, the link that all of them have is that they're all mitzvahs d'Rabbanan, they're all rabbinic mitzvahs. We don't find this principle of sha'af hein hayu ba'oso hanes when it comes to biblical commandments. If it's a mitzvah saseh shahazman grama, then women are exempt, except if the Gemara makes a special limud. So, for example, when it comes to achilas matzah, even though a matzah is a mitzvah saseh shahazman grama, the Gemara makes a special exception for women because there's a hekish that the Gemara makes between eating matzah, the positive commandment of eating matzah, and the negative commandment of not eating chametz. So, kol sheyeshno be'isr chametz yeshno ba'achilas matzah. Anyone that is subsumed under the prohibition of eating chametz is included under the commandment of eating matzah. But the Gemara does not say that by any other of the mitzvah saseh that are midioraisa shahazman grama, like sitting in a sukkah. Sitting in a sukkah is a mitzvah saseh shahazman grama, and women are patur from that mitzvah, even though that mitzvah is also commemorative of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Why don't we say sha'af hein hayu ba'oso hanes, that women were included in the miracle of living in a sukkah for 40 years in the desert? Ki basukos so shafti es b'nei Yisrael b'hotzio sami eretz Mitzrayim. So Rav Hai has answered that question, and he's told us, because it's not just that women were privy to the miracle, but they were to a large part contributed to the miracle being created. And the same thing is true with Esther in her contribution to the Purim story, and the same thing is true about Ner Chanukah of Tractate Shabbos. What is Rav Hai referring to? It's a little bit cryptic. There's no mention in Masechah Shabbos about women playing a role, other than the Gemara just saying also sha'af ein hayu ba'oso hanes. But where do we find it? What is the story? There's no story of Esther or any other woman that's mentioned in the Gemara. Unless, Laser, you saw something that maybe I'm just forgetting something, but I don't know, you'll have to go back.
What I see now, it's brought down in the Rashbam, so it's in the Gemara. It's in the...
Oh, it's in the typeset. Yeah, right.
I mean, this is it's there. The story is told in, you can find it, but not in the... Now I realize where...
In the Talmudic text, right.
Now we're...
Okay, so here's now the famous machlokas between the Rashbam and Tosfos. The Rashbam echoes Rav Hai, and he gives us a little bit more detail. Sha'af hein hayu ba'oso hanes, do'omer b'maseches sota, b'schar noshim sitkanios shahayu ba'oso hador nigalu, v'chein gabi mikra Megillah, omer hachi mishum daidei Esther hava, says the same thing as Rav Hai, v'chein gabi Chanuka, b'maseches Shabbos, lashon morenu halevi. This is the teaching of our master, the Levi. He basically says the same thing as Rav Hai. Now, so the Tosfos quotes the Rashbam, and he asks the question. He says, "V'kasha," source number 6, first line. V'kasha, he says, "Da'af mashma she'inan ikar." How can you tell me that they played an integral role in the miracle? Because the language of afhein, they too were part of the miracle, means that not that they were the primarily responsible for the miracle, but they too. They also were part of the miracle. That doesn't imply like what Rav Hai and the Rashbam are saying. So I don't have a problem. He says, "Va'od de b'Yerushalmi garish sha'afhein hayu ba'oso safek, mashma ba'oso sakana de lahashmid laharagula abed." And furthermore, the Yerushalmi's girsa is that not that they were involved in the miracle, but that they were involved in the same threat. They were under the same threat that the males were. So that also certainly does not imply like the Rashbam and Rav Hai are learning. V'hadem rinan to Peturos misuka aflagav de'afin hayu ba'oso hanes ki basukoso shafti hasam ba'asei de'oraisa. There, that's a positive mitzvah de'oraisa, says Tosfos. Avol be'arba kosos de'rabanan tiknu gam lenoshim kevin shehayu ba'oso hanes. So you see that sometimes, and really there's different ways of understanding Tosfos, that Tosfos says this only works with rabbinic law, that the rabbis will sometimes reinforce the halacha even more than the biblical law. So by biblical law, even though the svar of Afin Hayu Ba'oso Hanes applies, nevertheless, the Torah still exempts women. But when it comes to rabbinic law, commemorating a miracle like the Exodus or Purim or Chanukah, women are going to be obligated. Sha'afin Hayu Ba'oso Hanes. They were under the same threat that the men were. It's a bit strange, Tosfos's answer, although Tosfos's question is a compelling question. What do you do with the language Sha'afin Hayu Ba'oso Hanes? They too. So there's a beautiful pshat from Chassam Sofer. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this to you before or not, when we've talked about this subject of Afin Hayu Ba'oso Hanes. The Chassam Sofer says, what is a bigger miracle? If Hashem does a miracle for a tzaddik, or if Hashem does a miracle for a rasha, what would you say is the bigger nace?
Rasha is not deserving.
If Hashem does a miracle for a rasha, that's a bigger miracle. In other words, the holier the individual, the less miraculous the miracle is. Okay, so using that svara, when we say that women too were involved in the miracle, is that even though it wasn't as great of a miracle for the women, because they were naturally on a higher madrega than the men, Chassam Sofer says this, nevertheless, they too were part of the miracle. In other words, that's the way you understand it. Not that it doesn't mean that they were not an integral part of the miracle. They played an integral role in the miracle. But to say, what we want to try to convey is that it wasn't as much of a miracle for Hashem to save the women as it was for Hashem to save the men, because the women were far more deserving than the men of having miracles performed for them. Esther was far more deserving of an ace than Mordechai was. And that's why we say, Sha'afin Hayu Ba'oso Hanes. Nonetheless, it was a miracle still for Esther as well as it was for Mordechai. Am I communicating? Am I making myself clear? He says this in his parish on Chumash on the Shiras Hayam. Like, why is it that if the women were so deserving of Kriyas Yamsuf as much as the men, if not more so, why then does Moshe Rabbeinu have this long shira for the men, and the women for Miriam, Shiru Lashem ki ga'o ga'a sus v'rachavora mavayam? Right? Why just the one-liner? Like, don't the women deserve to have as much of a song as the men do? So he answers there too. When you're on such a high madrega, you don't have to sing as much shira, because it's that's what I expected of you, Hashem. Of course, you are going to do a miracle for me. So the shira meter is not as great for a woman's because a woman's expectations are, because of course I'm on that madrega. Of course you were going to do that for me. It's not as much of a chiddush that you were going to do that miracle for me, but for the men who are on a much lower madrega, then it was much more surprising, which is why the shira is that much greater. Okay, so that's how we get around the language of Sha'afin Hayu Ba'oso Hanes. Now the reason, as you're going to see why I'm bringing this all in, is because it is my thesis, and I hope this is not heretical, because it's being recorded, and if it is, someone will point it out to me. If what I am suggesting to you is that whether or not the Yehuda story ever happened in the context of Chanukah, or whether it happened ever at all, which is debated by scholars, the reason why Chazal incorporated, at least the Gaonim or Rishonim who incorporated this minhag of eating dairy on Chanukah, did so because of the principle Sha'afin Hayu Ba'oso Hanes. Now, the point is like this. If we are going to say that women are obligated in the mitzvah of Neiros Chanukah, and they have the same legal obligation as men do, and you're going to learn that it's because Sha'afin Hayu Ba'oso Hanes, you have to learn consistently that there was a feminine heroine figure that was involved in the Chanukah story. And you have to identify someone, because there is no legend or midrash that tells us that the women during this period of Hellenism were any more heroic than the men. So therefore, in this vacuum, this story of Yehudit was inserted in the context of the Chanukah story to be able to fill that role. And furthermore, the minhag of eating dairy was to reinforce that very weak literary source. Because the literary source of Yehudit is tremendously weak, it's not a Megillah, but as we'll see, it's called a Megillah, as we'll see in just a moment, but it's not part of Tanakh. It's not even part of the corpus of rabbinic literature. As a result, it becomes necessary to bolster that story of Yehudis by actually instituting a religious practice that is based upon a story that may or may not have ever happened. Now, it could also be, when we get to the story, you'll see that the cheese part is the least significant component of that whole story. We'll talk about that as well. Okay, I'll take a couple of questions. David.
If one wanted to ascribe a heroic woman to the story, why not use Hannah and her 7 sons' fame?
Because we don't know what that has to do with the Chanukah story either.
Why? She was fighting against the Xeris.
That's one version of the story. You're going to see, even though tonight's shir is not about Chana, but you're going to see that the connection between Chana and the Yevanim and the Chashmonaim is as nebulous as the connection between Yehudis and the Chashmonaim and the Yevanim. Yes, Mark.
When Tosfos says V'chanach al yedei Yehudis, he's quoting the Rashbam for that. But if you look at the Rashbam, he quotes the Gemara on Shabbos, but he doesn't mention Yehudis in that source. So where does Tosfos get that it's Yehudis?
Yes, I believe that the Rashbam is elsewhere. I believe there's another Rashbam somewhere else, and I'm not sure where it is. Or maybe he's quoting Rashi. I don't remember. I honestly don't remember. It could be there's a Rashbam somewhere else, but you'll see it's Iran. Okay, yes, Archie.
Was the book of Yehudit, was it found in Dead Sea Scrolls?
I'm going to tell you all about the book of Judith. Hold on to your hat.
Okay.
Aaron.
Why did they care so much to make it so that women were part of the mix? Why did they want to make it so much?
Well, we know that, that's really the whole question. Why did Chazal in the first place take a mitzvah saseh shazman grama, when normally the rule is that nashim are peturos, and why did they make women chayiv? We find this is true by Megillat Esther, we find this is true by Arbakosis, we find this is true by Chanuka. What was Chazal's motivation? It could be, sometimes we find that Chazal, Chachamenu asu chizikli divrehim yoser mishel Torah, that sometimes in order to be able to reinforce a rabbinic law and make sure that it gains wide acceptance, they reinforce it even more than a biblical law. So it's very possible that in order for it to gain acceptance, they said that everyone, including the women, have to participate in this mitzvah, so that it becomes a family mitzvah, not just for the men to do. Okay, let's take a look at the Ran, who is the first. The Ran and the Kolbo, I'm not really sure. They're about the same time. I'm not sure do you know which one comes first? I'm not sure whether it's the Ran or the Kolbo that come first. Both around 13th, 14th century. And the Ran says, Sha'afein hayu ba'osel hanes. I think the Ran is first. Shegazru al kol habesulos hanisaos sheyivalu lahegmon tchila va'al yedei isha nasa nes. Now this is the riff on Maseches Shabbos, which also says that women are to have the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah because they were involved in the miracle. And the Ran says because at that time the Yevanim made a decree of jus prime noctus, and therefore it was through a woman that a miracle was performed that they were able to avert that decree. Damrina b'medrash, the bito shel Yochanan ha'achilo l'rosh ha'oivim gevina l'shichruso v'chascha es rosho ubarchu kulam. There's a medrash. Now, by the way, there is a series of midrash which give us the story of Yehudis. And in one of those midrashic narratives, it's a very late midrash. You can find it in the Sefer Otzar HaMidrashim. I didn't copy it for you because it's very lengthy, and I didn't copy the book of Judith for you either, which I'll describe. All of these texts are very lengthy, but if you want to read more about all of these different texts that have been passed down to us throughout the ages about this person called Yehudis, I recently picked up a fascinating book called The Sword of Judith. And it was published in 2010 by a group of scholars. I think most of them are women. They had this fascination with Judith. But one of them is a professor at the Tel Aviv University, and she writes a very interesting article about the relationship between Yehudis and Chanukah, but there are many, many other articles in this anthology of essays on Judith, on the biblical and post-biblical character of Yehudis. and they go through all of the different texts and the variations in the story. Anyway, so the Ran tells us that is this story that she cut off his head. She was the daughter of Yochanan. She gave him gevina to make him drunk. She cut off his head, and they all ran away. That's why we eat cheese on Chanukah. So this is the first linkage that I've been able to find. The Ran and the Kolbo are the first to link eating gevina on Chanukah to the story of Yehudis. You can find the connection between Yehudis and Chanukah in certain late Midrashim, but this is the very first place that I've ever been able to find the connection between dairy products and Chanukah based on the story of Yehudis. The Kolbo says as well, V'noshim chayavos b'neros Chanukah, sha'afin hayu ba'oso hanes, perish sha'ho'ivim ba'u la'abed hakol, anoshim v'noshim v'taf, that the enemies wanted to destroy everyone, men, women, and children. V'yesh meforshim sha'yedei isha ira lehem hanes hagodol hahu, u'shma Yehudis k'moshim furish ba'agoda bas ha'isel Yochanan Kohen Gadol, as the Medrash says that Yochanan Kohen Gadol had a beautiful daughter, v'yisor yifas toar ma'od, v'omer hamelech Yavan shetishkav imo v'hechilaso tavshil shel gevina, k'dei sheyitzma v'yishteh l'rov, v'yishtaker. So she gave him something that was cheesy so that he would become very thirsty, and that's what happened, and he became drowsy. Vayishka vayeradam vahila kain vayishka vayeradam vatikach charbo v'chascha rosho v'tiviyel Yerushalayim v'chiros hachayel kimeis gevurim vayanusu v'alkeinagu lasus tavshil shel gevina b'Chanukah. That is why we make cheesy foods on Chanukah. Okay, so while you're enjoying your fried cheese food, doesn't sound very healthy. The Abu Darham identifies that the person that she killed was Antiochus, which is also very strange to say, because we know that Antiochus is never recorded as having been decapitated, but this is part of the Jewish tradition. Comes along the Ben Ish Chai. It's only the 19th century, but it's a major Sephardi posek and exegete, and he says as follows: Ochlin ma'choli cholav b'Chanukah, says the Ben Ish Chai, zecher l'nei shenasa b'cholav shehechila Yehudis es ha'oyev shahayim imalchei Yavan. So says the Ben Ish Chai as follows. He says, V'hama'iseh huva b'sefer Chemdas Yomim. In the earlier Sefer Chemdas Yomim, we have this story. V'neiseh na'aseh kodem neiseh ikari shel Chanukah b'kama shanim. So the Ben Ish Chai says, but I need you to know that the story of Judith really happened many years before the actual miracle of Purim takes place. So he's already telling us that if not so fast, it's not directly connected to the story. However, hoel va'oso oyev hayom imalche Yavan v'gam haya rotzeh lehavir maldas, but because this enemy was also Greek, he's also from the Greeks, and he also wanted to cause the Jews to leave their faith. That's why they rolled it into the story of Chanukah. In other words, it's not part of the Hasmonean story. It's not that this Judith was the daughter of Yochanan Kohen Gadol. That's not true, says the Ben Ish Chai. Historically, that's not the case. But they rolled it into Chanukah because thematically it's related to the story of Chanukah, even though it happened many years prior. And he says, Al derech sha'amru lechol zir'onim bepurim zecher l'neshel Daniel olav hasholom v'chaveirav aleihem hasholom. He says, and it's the same thing that we have on Purim, that we have a minhag, some people have a minhag to eat seeds on Purim because Daniel, who was part of the Babylonian exile, which happens approximately the same time as the story of Mordechai and Esther, precedes it perhaps by a generation. But in order to be able to thematically incorporate a memory of what happened to the great Daniel of the exile, people have a minhag on Purim to eat seeds because that's what Daniel subsisted on, because he couldn't get kosher food. There was no kosher laffa places in Bavel during that 70-year exile. So therefore he subsisted on seeds. And therefore some people have a minhag to eat seeds on Purim to remind them of the exile of Daniel. V'nirli b'sayata dishmaya lirmoz tam b'chalav lishlosha mitzvot shegozu levatlam He says, and I would therefore like to suggest that what is the connection to dairy? What is the connection to milk products? To remember the story of Yehudis? I mean, after all, is that such an important part of the story? Now, here's what the Ben Ish Chai is alluding to. When you read the original story of Yehudis, because we have a book called Yehudis, it's part of the Apocrypha, as I'm going to show you in just a second. When you read the original text of Yehudis, there is no mention of dairy products at all in that story. It simply says that she gave him wine to drink and he got drowsy and he fell asleep. So ask the Ben Ish Chai, so why is it taka that we eat dairy products if that's not part of the story? It was added, it was a detail that was added later. So one answer I gave you in jest, but it's not so much in jest. If there's no mitzvah of mishteh on Chanuka, because it's an esoteric nace, it's not a physical nace, right? Then it's inappropriate to take the icon of the Purim Suda and to transfer it to Chanukah. We have to find something unique to Chanukah. So that in itself is a reason to find something other than wine to utilize on Chanukah to remind us of what happened to Yehudis. But the Ben Ish Chai says, I have another answer. He says the word chalav is an allusion to the three things that the Greeks tried to prevent us from doing. Shehem Chodesh, Shabbos, Mila. And what are these three things? They tried to stop us from having Rosh Chodesh, they tried to stop us from observing Shabbos, and they tried to stop us from performing Bris Milah. Umasru Yisrael Atzman Aleim. And the Jewish people were willing to give up their lives with Mesiras Nefesh in order to continue observing these three commandments. Da'os ches d'chalav hu os rishona shel chodesh. He says, because the letter ches of the word chalav reminds us of the word Rosh Chodesh. And va'os beis d'chalav hu os sheni shel Shabbos. The letter beis of chalav is the second letter of Shabbos. And va'os lamed d'chalav hu os shlishi shel Mila. And the letter lamed is the third letter of the word Milah. So you have the three decrees: Chalav, Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos, Bris Milah. Okay? What do you say, Laser?
Stretch.
Yeah.
Okay. You said it, not me. Okay, now.
Why didn't anybody suggest that it's related to Yael? She gave milk to us.
Oh! You looking ahead? Okay. Take a look in your handout. Samuel. I was going to get to this much later, but because Samuel brought it up, we're going to discuss it now. You do find that sometimes Chazal will insert details of a story from one story into another story when it is expedient in order to create a minhag. Okay, and this is the example. So Samuel is recalling that in the story of Yael, she gives Sisera something dairy. She gives him milk to drink in order to make him drowsy and fall asleep. Right? There are sexual undertones, or was it overtones or undertones in that story? So the pasuk over there says that Vateitze Yael likras Sisra. This isn't from Sefer Shoftim. Vatomer elav Surah Adoni Surah Elai al Tira. She says, "Come hide in my tent." Vayasor Eleha ha'ohela batechasehu basemicha. She brings him into her tent and she covers him with a blanket. Pasuk Yutes says, "Vayomer Eleha hashkini name atmayim kitzamesi." He says, "Please let me have a drink of water. I'm dying of thirst." Vatiftach esnod hechalav, vatashkehu, vatechasehu. She gives him the flask of milk, and she gives him to drink, and she covers him. Chazal say that this is all euphemism for the fact that she was sexually intimate with him in some way. Now, what happens right afterwards? He falls asleep, and we know what happens. She takes the tent peg and sticks it in his head and kills him. So comes along the Berditchever, and this is so that you shouldn't think that this is some like out there kind of scholarly heresy, right? Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev says as follows. He says in the Kedushas Levi, "Hamaisav mi Yehudis b'Chanukah." So comes along the Berditchever and he says, Haklalhu hatzadikim kesherotzim lahalos nitzotzos tzrichim lefa'amim la'avor al divrei Torah. He says sometimes when tzadikim need to elevate the sparks of holiness from something that is mundane and unholy, they have to violate some aspect of the Torah in the course of doing that, to raise the sparks of holiness from that which is unholy. You have to get down in the mud in order to pull out the Kedusha. And what does it mean to get into the mud? You have to sometimes do some things that are improper in order to be able to lift up the holiness from the world. Kemo begida, kedamrinan bigamara shivat dvarim hutru ba'oso layla gabi hamizbeach she'asa gida. He says an example of this is Gid'on, who built an illicit altar when altars were forbidden, and he did so. Why? He says, "V'hatam lefisha ba'oso zman hayu Yisrael ovdim avoda zara, ulekachat tzadikim sherotzim lalos laHashem tzarich lasos ezu uvda ku'uvda shalahem." In order to pull the Jewish people out of the quagmire of idolatry, it is sometimes necessary to do something that is akin to idolatry in order to remove the holy sparks within the act of idolatry itself and elevate the Jewish people and pull them out of that quagmire of idolatry. So Gideon had to do something that was akin to idolatry in order to bring the Jewish people out of idolatry. That's the mystical concept, okay? He says, "Kedei sha'al yedei zeh yuchal lishbor es haklipa," because in so doing you can break the husk that contains the holy spark. Then he says, "V'chein b'nei shel devora shehaya sham Yael eshes chever hakeni im Sisra kenemar kara nafal sham nafal shedud." And the Berditchever knows that you understand that what Chazal say, that when it says that Sisra crouched down and he fell, it means that he was involved in the intimacy with Yael when he was killed. The crime of the Jewish people, the sin was not idolatry during this particular period of history. But the Jews needed to be redeemed. And therefore it says that there had to be some indulgence in some kind of sexual impropriety in order to elevate the Jewish people from the mundane and bring them up to a higher madrega. And there was no sin of idolatry in that generation. That the Jewish people had all their hearts were towards the divine, just like a palm tree has only one trunk, right? The Gabi Chanuka Gankein Shahaya Geula Ulakach Tzarech Yehudis Litein Lo Gevina. He says that's the connection to Yehudis. Is that the reason why she needed to feed him cheese is because she too had to participate in some kind of activity that was going to bring the Jewish people out of the quagmire of Hellenism. And it wasn't an idolatry, right? It wasn't idolatry. He says the problem there was not idolatry. The problem there was a corrupt behavior. Like the Gemara says, the men were moshech ba'or lasam. They tried to subvert their circumcision. And as a result, in order to be able to pull the Jewish people, pull out the holy sparks out of Hellenism, and to be able to elevate them back to where they needed to be, she had to commit this act as well. So clearly the imagery of Gevina is related to Yael. But we need to go to the main event. Before I get to to anything else, let's talk about what the book of Judith is about. Now, if you study biblical texts from a scholarly framework, you'll discover that there is a whole series of books called the Apocrypha. And the Apocrypha are what we call in Hebrew Sfarim Chitzonim. These are books that are not considered to be part of Tanakh. They were never accepted by Chazal as part of biblical canon because they were not written with the proper degree of Ruach HaKodesh, or were not uniformly written with Ruach HaKodesh. In other words, there could have been some books that had some degree of Ruach HaKodesh, but were not uniformly through and through written with Ruach HaKodesh, and therefore they were not incorporated. We have several books like this that other religions, like the Catholicism, incorporates certain books of the Apocrypha as part of the Old Testament, but as part of the 24 Sifrei Tanakh of the Jewish people, they're not part of the Jewish canon of Tanakh. One of those books is called Sefer Yehudit, the Book of Judith. And the Book of Judith is the original story of Yehudis, where we get this story about a woman who decapitates a man who's oppressing the Jewish people. When you read the story, you will see that it has absolutely nothing to do with the Chashmonaim. And it was only later in history when the Chashmonaim were in somehow historically melded together with the story of Yehudit. And this we've already seen, the Ben Ish Chai has alluded to already. He already understood that, because the Ben Ish Chai probably knew that this is a Sefer Yehudis. Has nothing to do historically with the Chashmonaim. So let's take a look. This is from the cover page of Sefer Yehudit that I have in my library. Was published by Yavne, Hotzaat Yavne in 1969. It's a publishing house. It was an old publishing house in Tel Aviv. And it was translated and with a commentary by Professor Hartom. And this is the introduction that he provides for Sefer Yehudit. We'll see. We won't be able to get through all of it tonight. It's in Greek. Most scholars believe that the Book of Judith was originally written in Hebrew and was later translated into Greek. We don't have the Hebrew. Hebrew was lost. And so all we have is the Greek text. And so this is a translation from the Greek into Hebrew.
Back into Hebrew.
Back into Hebrew, which we don't have. Right. So this is his introduction to the Book of Judith to give us the historical context. B'Sefer Yehudit Musupar al Melech Echad HaMechunen Nebuchadnezzar Melech Ashur. The story, the narrative of the Book of Judith, and this is, you can find the Book of Judith online. Just Google it, and you can get the whole text of the Book of Judith in English if you want. And you'll see that we're not making this up. The story is told in the Book of Judith about Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Assyria. Sha'asa milchama imar Pachshad melech Madai. He made a war with Arpachshad. Who was Arpachshad? It's from Parshas Lech Lecha. That goes all the way back to the times of Avraham. So we got a whole confusion, jumble of different names from different historical periods that are mixed into this story. The king of Madai. Vayikra la'amim shonim uvesochem b'nei Yisrael lavola ezrasa. So Nebuchadnezzar calls out to other nations of the Middle East, come to my side and help fight my war against Arpachshad. Ahem dachu es kriyasa. However, the Jews, together with others, declined to go out to battle with Nebuchadnezzar. La'achar shenatzach Nebuchadnezzar es melech Madai v'kavash es achmesa biraso. After Nebuchadnezzar is successful in battle and he conquers a place called Achmesa, which is his capital, sholach es chelo uverosho hasar Holofernes. He goes out and sends his general Holofernes, which is the name that is given by some texts as the general that Yehudis decapitates, Lalos al ha'amim sheservu la'azor lo ul hashmidosam, to go up against those nations who had refused his request to join him and become his allies. B'nei Yisrael hispatzru mipanav b'makom oshonim v'miyuchad be'ir hanikres Baitulua, that the Jewish people hold themselves up to protect themselves in different places. Among them, and particularly among them, was a city called Baitulua. Now, what's the significance of the word Baitulua? We'll see in just a second. Oloferne sam matzor al irzu v'tafasis kol hamayanos shebekir vasa. So the narrative of the Book of Judith continues that Holofernes besieges the city. He seizes and stops up all of the waterways that go into the city. In order to force them to subjugate themselves to Holofernes, because once you cut off their water supply, they're doomed. After 34 days of the siege, they can't take it anymore. They beg the gatekeeper to open up the gates and let them out. Rashei ha'ir hivtichu lahem lasos kein imlo yoshiem Hashem besoch chamisha yamim. And the heads of the city said, listen, we will open up the gates and we'll surrender if in 5 days Hashem does not save us. Vayomim hahem yashva b'ir baitulua isha achas almana mishevet Shimon ushma Yehudis. Does that have any semblance to what we're talking about now? So in the book, in the story of Judith, there is a woman whose name is Yehudis. She's an almana, and she's from the tribe of Shimon. Okay, nothing to do with the Maccabim, nothing to do with the Chashmonoi. She is a beautiful woman, God-fearing, wonderful. So first she rebukes the heads of the city, and she says to them, what you're doing is a lack of bitachon, by sort of giving Hashem a deadline and saying, if in 5 days Hashem doesn't save us, we're going to surrender. Biksha rishus lotzeis min ha'ir v'hivtichasam ki v'so chameshes hayomim yoshiyim elokim biyada. So she says, let me go out. I'll go out, and I promise you that within those 5-day deadline that you've given, I will save our city. But she doesn't tell them what she's planning to do. Rashei ha'ir berechuha v'hi hiskashta v'yatsa im amasa el machane ha'oivim v'hisyatzva lifnei olofernes v'amr lo ki Yehudiyahim umin ha'ir hanitzura hi barachas. So they let her go. She goes and dresses herself up really nice and stands with Holofernes, and she says that she's a Jewess and she's from the besieged city and she's fleeing. Because after all, she says, God has forsaken us because of our sins. And she comes to tell him that eventually he's going to defeat the Jews, and not only will you take over our town, but you'll take over the entire city of Jerusalem. And she says, I'm even going to give you the date because I am a prophetess. Holofernes, so he's blown away, Holofernes, by her wisdom and her beauty. He believes her, and he has this desire for her. And therefore he makes a party, and he says, bring me this Judith woman. So he gets drunk, and when everyone else is left, she takes the sword and decapitates him. And then she puts it back, she puts the head in her satchel, she goes quietly back to her city. She tells her brethren what she has done. Now, don't tell this story to ISIS, because this is not, we're not promoting decapitation here. But in any event, so when this was notified to Holofernes' army, they find his headless body, so they all flee and run away. And the Jewish people run after them, they smite them, and they despoil them. The last part of the book talks about how she dies as an old woman. I think it says she was 105 when she dies, and that she just, she was like a heroine for all of that time. There's also a side story. There's also like a subplot in this whole story of Judith about a man whose name is Achior, who is the head of the Ammonites. That he tells Holofernes that the Jewish people cannot be defeated unless they have sinned against their God. And Holofernes doesn't believe him, and he delivers him into the captivity together with the Jews. And Hem kibluhu b'chavod gadol, so they accepted this man Achior. V'acharei nitzchonam hitgayer. And after the Jews defeat Holofernes, he goes ahead and converts to Judaism. So that's the narrative of this very long book called Yehudis in a nutshell. Okay, now let's take a look at the historical origins of this story. Hakadmonim ra'u b'sefer Yehudis sipor histori. So earlier historians see an actual historical narrative here. Hakatolim he'eminu ki nichtav b'ruach hakodesh. Catholics believe that this book was written with divine inspiration. Kein l'mashal lo huskru b'shum makor achar melech Ashur sheshmo Nebuchadnezzar v'ir b'shem Baytulua. For example, nowhere in the annals of history, except for this book, is there ever made mention of a king called Nebuchadnezzar of the Assyrians, nor is there ever a city mentioned in the ancient world called Baytulua. So how do we reconcile this? So that's, ayin b'Catholic meforshim. You'll see someone will talk about it, okay? So, v'hayidiyos ha-geografiot shebasefer nirot mevulbalot uvilti meduyakot. He says, all of the geographic locations seem to be completely out of whack. Hasha'arot shonot hubu'u b'inyan zeh, mehen kedei lahazkir. So let me tell you, he says different theories that have been suggested for all of the confusion. He says, Nebuchadnezzar melech Ashur hu kinoi le'echad mimalchei paras. So he goes through a whole bunch of different theories and tries to explain who these people are, and that they are different Persian rulers. And he says that it stands to reason that this is Artaxerxes. Is that how you pronounce his name? Artaxerxes is the ruler, and Holofernes is his general. So therefore, Nebuchadnezzar really is a code word for this Artaxerxes, who's is he before Achashverosh, or it is Achashverosh?
Some argue that he was.
Some say that he was, some say that it was before him, but the point is that it's definitely before the period of the Hasmoneans, you understand. Now, let's go to the next paragraph. Then he says, "Hachokrim hachadashim hibiu deot shonot al afyo shel hasef." Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't want to skip too much. Let's see. Oh, he says if you go to the fifth line, this is interesting. Hashem Baytulua hu kinui l'Yerushalayim. They say that the city Baytulua is really a code word for Jerusalem itself, because besof yemei habeinaim uvimei haRenaissance hu ba'a hasvara ki kol hakatuv basefer eino ela mashal v'chi bekavana bilbel hamechaber shemot uzmanim kedei sheyeh barur lakorei ki ein hasefer mesaper me'orot amitiyim. In the Renaissance period, the theory was that this is not a real story, and there was deliberately an obfuscation of names and places so that people should know that it never really happened. But rather, the whole story is a metaphor. V'chol hashemot hem simliyim bilvad. All of the names are therefore really just metaphorical to teach us different metaphorical lessons. Hashem Yehudit hu remez la'umah ha'yisraelit. So therefore, the name Yehudit is a metaphor for the Jewish people, right? The Jewish nation. Hashem Baytulua, remez levesulas Yisrael o lebeit hamikdash. And the word Baytulua is a play on the word Bitula, the Virgin Israel, or right, or Beitel, Baytulua, Beitel. Right? Leave it to the Catholics to come up with that connection. Okay, so then he says, Hachokrim HaChadashim. He says, now the later scholars, post-Renaissance period, so what do they say? Hibiu deot shonot al afyo shel hasefer va'al zman chiburo. They all different ideas. Now, we don't have time to go through all of these different theories. I leave it for you to finish the introduction on your own. What you see from here is there is no consensus on the historical context of the book of Yehudit, but one thing is clear. There is no mention of her being the daughter of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, and there's no mention of Antiochus, there's no mention of the Greeks, there's no mention of dairy products, and so where do we go from here? Well, there are midrashim that are written much later than the book of Judith that do connect the story of Yehudit to Chanuka, but those texts do not have any mention of dairy products. And as I mentioned to you, the first source that I've been able to find is the Ran and the Kolbo, who connect Yehudit to Chanuka and to dairy. There is one scroll called Megillat Yehudit that I was able to find, and I have to thank Professor Eric Lowy, who I sent an email to before Shabbos, and I said, can you get me a copy of Megillat Yehudit? Megillat Yehudit is a scroll from either the 14th or 15th century, and if you want, you could read more about it. You can read the whole story. It's not clear what its origin is, but as you can see, the original custom was in certain communities, just like certain communities have a minhag to recite Megillas Chashmonoim or Megillas Antiochus, right, on Chanukah. There was a custom in certain Italian communities to read an actual story, an actual narrative in public of the story of Chanukah. There was a custom to read the narrative of the story of Yehudit publicly as well. And towards the end of the story, when we read about Holofernes, and here he is described as having something to do with the Yevanim and fighting against the Chashmonoim, if you go to page 45 in this book, which was published by a scholar whose name was Heberman, Aleph Mem Heberman, in a sefer called Chadashim Gam Yishanim. The manuscript exists in, I believe, in Oxford today, is the only extant original manuscript of this Megillat Yehudit, but he transcribed it. And if you go to page 45, this is the very first place that you can find in the narrative itself where it talks about dairy. But again, this is a relatively late text. It's even later, it's dated even later than the Ran and the Kolbo. So if you look at the top of the page, it says, Vayomer to vayiki chafetz bevas Yehuda, that he desired this daughter of Judah, this Yehudis. Vayizak bekol gadol bechol hamachane, and he cries out and he says, everyone out of my tent. Vayarchiku me'aleihem ma'od, vayiru lenafshosam. And everyone scatters. Vatomer Yehudis tzamesi, v'gam b'tzom nafshi anisi. And he says to Yehudis, I'm thirsty and I've been fasting. Vatomer l'shivchasa, so she goes ahead and tells either her maiden or his maiden, Bashli lishtei levivot ve'echre miyadech. Cook for me 2 levivot. What are levivot? Latkes. So you also have a minhag for the source for latkes over here as well. Vatas laha levivot vatim lachim ad ma'od. And she puts lots of salt in the latkes. Uvacharitze chalav shavchal hasir. Then she puts curds of milk. She pours them on the pot. Vatikachem vativiem hachedra asher aliforni shama. Then she brings this latkes and cheese, salty cheese, to where Holofernes is there. Vayas aliferne kara gedola es mishtei Yehudis. Vayochel es halavivot vet charitze achalav. Vayesht vayitav libo vayishkav yiskal besoch halo, etc. Vayishkav vayeradam. And then it says that she cut off his head. And by the way, contained in the story as well is the whole story of jus nocturne, prime nocturne, whatever it's called, right? Rites of the first night. It's also part of the story that was also incorporated sometime later. That was never part of the original Judith story in the Apocrypha. So the bottom line is that there are many, many different Judith stories, is really what I wanted to provide to you. Only one relatively late narrative even has the story of dairy products in the narrative in the first place. As the Berditchever says, it has to do with connecting her to the story of Yael. Either because she really was a Yehudis, and she needed to feed him milk because there was also the elevation that Yael did for the Klal Yisrael needed to take place in the times of Yehudis as well. Because if it's not idolatry, then it's forbidden sexuality. So that's what milk is an allusion to. Or it's because Chazal needed to find a foothold in this practice of women being chayiv in mitzvahs asay derabanan she'azman grama. There's no Megillas Esther. There's no Mishnah v'Simcha. We got to find something that the Jewish people can do to actually commemorate that af hein hayu ba'oso hanes. And that's why I think that dairy became the minhag of choice, sort of like by process of elimination. It can't be wine. There's no Megillas Esther. There's no Mishnah v'Simcha. So we're not going to have basar because there's no mitzvah of Suda. So we'll have milchiks, we'll have a slice of pizza, we'll have levivot with cheese on top, or sour cream, or chves.
So the Mishnah Berurah get this then from? The
Mishnah Berurah gets it from the Ran and the Kolbo. The Kolbo gives you the whole story, but the question is, the Kolbo's narrative is based on a much later source. Okay, I hope it's not. I hope you don't view this as heretical. I mean, sometimes the truth will set you free, and sometimes it will mix you up. But this is really what I'm telling you is divrei emes, even though it's not something that you may have learned previously. But it's very, very clear here in black and white that this is the history.